Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. And I'm super excited about this one. This one that I've been wanting to do. I was on vacation and I kind of waited until I was back from vacation to be able to record this. I am joined by returning guest to the channel, Ben Jacobs. The first video we did was my best video ever almost. It did super well. And Ben has been very integral into reporting on Chelsea and has all of these updates. So we're going to be doing a transfer update special for you all. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. How's it going?
I'm good, Ellie. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's nice. It was really hot in Madrid, so it's actually cooled down, and I'm very grateful for that. That it's a normal temperature at this point. Guys, my husband might be calling the phone, just FYI, because he's locked out. So if it does happen, maybe we edit it out. I don't know, but just giving you guys a warning. Ben, let's get started with this. And I think a lot of Chelsea fans will maybe say, well, the window has been kind of quiet for them. But we know that there's been a lot of things that have been happening, a lot of restructuring happening behind the scenes. So my first question is, could you give us a little bit of insight into what's been going on in case anybody isn't aware of the structural changes that have been made?
Sure. Well, effectively, there's a new board, and Todd Boehly is effectively the man who's in control of Chelsea in an operational sense, even as minority owner, has been relatively quick and decisive through a mixture of his own intent and also having had feedback with a number of key figures at the football club. So Buck has gone, Marina has gone, Petr Cech has gone, and the board has 9 core members, including some non-executive ones like Danny Finkelstein. And this is the sort of first step of a relatively long process still of restructuring, changing the senior decision makers at the football club, and eventually coming up with a new model of recruitment as well, which will be more data-led. And that in turn should make the football club more sustainable. And what we're seeing in essence is Todd Boehly being very hands-on. He's the chairman, he's the interim sporting director, and that is going to be very different to under Roman Abramovich, where we saw a far more distant owner who naturally didn't engage with the fan base or really give too much of a clue as to what his strategy was. Marina, on the other hand, was much more personable, was obviously a key negotiator and had a number of roles at the football club beyond just her title, but she is still there. Buck is still there. Both of them can be relied upon to pass on, for example, key contacts if they need to. So it's not only a sense of a new era, it's also still a transitional period where we are going to see some of the old regime and guard input where necessary. And that, I think, is the key thing to reiterate, because the fan base will see all of these changes and a lack of incomings as well and say what's going on is Boehly in above his head. But in Boehly, comparative especially to Abramovich, you have a highly ambitious and proactive owner that is prepared to take things by the scruff of the neck and lead by example. But that doesn't mean that he's not being advised by a number of key people within the football club and even potentially outside it who have experience in each of these different areas. And that, I think, is going under the radar a little bit because it's far easier to jump towards the headline of Boehly is chair, Boehly is interim sporting director. Boehly effectively might have to step into Petr Cech's shoes as well and kind of be a technical director. But actually the reality is very different. So first of all, as regards Boehly being chair, that was always the plan. And I've said this many times, that when you're bidding to buy Chelsea Football Club, you have to take one position because you are trying to win the bid against rival suitors. And it was clear during that process that Bruce Buck in particular would have preferred to stay on as chairman. So the last thing that you want to do when you're bidding for the football club is ultimately say, I, as Boehly, would like your job as Buck, because Buck at that point was still a very key decision maker in who was going to win or lose. And with the Sir Martin Broughton bid, for example, they did have another chair, and it was kind of a sticking point, even though perhaps Buck couldn't say that explicitly. So there's an element of kind of gamesmanship, and the Clear Lake Boehly Group had always said that they were going to come in, They were going to talk to each individual. They were going to get feedback from them and then determine how they were going to proceed. And it was always also clear that clearly Boehly, and Boehly in particular, wanted to change quickly the Chelsea model of recruitment to something a little bit more similar to Liverpool. And they've made no secret of saying that off record when asked about their plans, because that is not only more strategic and data-led, but it's also more sustainable in the long term. So it's no real surprise that we're seeing these changes, but there will be a transitional period and maybe even a period of uncertainty before everything comes to light and all of the key executives are recruited. But in that period, it's not like Boehly is just doing everything. Marina is still technically there, even though she's not officially a director. She, quote, remains available. Buck is a senior advisor. Jonathan Goldstein, who kind of goes under the radar as well in all of this, is almost a de facto CEO and has a very close relationship with Todd Boehly. So whilst he's flying around or in the future potentially sucked into other business ventures, Goldstein is London-based and on a day-to-day level is also there at the football club. And they'll bolster and strengthen other executive areas of the football club over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I think that is something that is super interesting and going under the radar, because a lot of people are seeing, like you said, that Todd Boehly is taking on these many different hats, but it's something that's kind of happening right now, but it's not necessarily going to be like that in the future. And one of the things that, at least I saw from my perspective, is that he looked like he wanted to sort out the Lukaku situation first and foremost. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I want to kind of understand more who this decision was made by. Was it made by Thomas Tuchel in conjunction with Todd Boehly, and the reason for prioritizing this, and then maybe where that deal stands? Because I understand that it should be essentially done and announced soon, but when we can expect that?
Yes, it's a done deal. Lukaku will be announced in the middle of this week, and it's kind of a problem that clearly Boehly inherited, because it's been clear since around January that Romelu Lukaku wanted to leave, and Chelsea's new ownership group have come in and had to deal with this, because first of all, if they're going to offload Lukaku, they need that resolved, and they need to determine what income they have from it and the situation with the wages, and then they can go out into the market and find a replacement. And there was certainly some division among senior Chelsea figures as to how to handle the Lukaku situation. Marina, in particular, was very open to just keeping Lukaku for another year. Boehly, though, spoke directly to Thomas Tuchel and effectively determined that the relationship between the two was probably irreparable. So then there's a decision to be made from Boehly. Do you loan out Lukaku, especially considering Inter's finances? And that was the only likely option. And beyond that, do you force Inter to buy, or at least give them the option, or still ultimately have that ability to call Lukaku back after a year if he does well in Italy? And I think that Boehly very much is of the belief that he wants to back Thomas Tuchel, but who knows where the football club is going to be in a year's time. So Chelsea have now got the option, if they want, to bring back Lukaku after a year, or if he does really well at Inter, then when they either try and loan him again for another year or come into the market, Chelsea have got all of the cards, because at that stage it will be clear how desperately Inter perhaps want Lukaku, and their finances may have changed. So the deal is completely done. Chelsea originally wanted a little bit closer to 20 million euros as a loan fee, but the compromise is around 8 million euros, but the add-ons will take it beyond that still. And Chelsea get a small amount of the overall transfer fee that they paid around a year ago. They offload Lukaku to a club where he wants to return. And now they know that they have to find attacking options in the market, because Lukaku might not have got the total number of goals that he has in previous seasons, at least not in the league. He's always got into double figures, dating all the way back to his first spell at Chelsea. That was the only time, I think, when he didn't get into double figures in the league, during that first spell at Chelsea. Every other season he has. So the 8 goals that he got in the Premier League last season with Chelsea was not a good return, but clearly unsettled at Stamford Bridge. But you never know. And I think that is Boehly's approach to Lukaku. You want to solve the short-term problem of getting him off the wage bill and out of the dressing room, because clearly it's a point of contention. He doesn't enjoy working under Thomas Tuchel. He doesn't fit into the system. He's not happy at the football club. And then in a year's time, you reassess, both in terms of the individual player, Thomas Tuchel's opinion of him. Who knows? Thomas Tuchel might not even be there. And I don't mean that in a sensationalist sense of, I don't think Tuchel will last. Quite the opposite. I think the new ownership group are investing in Thomas Tuchel, but you just never know. Anything can happen in football. So I think Todd Boehly's of the belief, because he's brand new to the football club, that he just wants to resolve that situation so Chelsea can move on in a way that still gives Chelsea some market value and the ability to reassess in a year's time. There were other figures at the football club like Marina that were more inclined just to keep Lukaku. And there was also different options explored, such as, are there any other suitors there that Lukaku might go to that allow Chelsea to just get rid permanently and cash in? And there weren't, unfortunately. PSG, Bayern Munich, names of that ilk were mentioned, but nobody came in for Romelu Lukaku. And this is really a problem with a player that makes their desire to leave to one particular club so public. Not only are other suitors put off, but they instantly realise that they're getting a player that might be disruptive to their dressing room. So when Lukaku forces a move back to Inter, that's all very well, because Inter are like, great, he's desperate to come, and they've had him before, so they know what they're in for. And Lukaku's also got a relationship with Lautaro Martinez, and those two will play well together. So everything from Inter's point of view makes this a non-risk move. They've had him before. They know that he suits the style. They know he gets on with the other players. They know that he wants the move, and it's only a loan deal. So it's win-win from Inter's point of view. But with other clubs, they see a player that might be a risk to their dressing room. And Dembele, from Chelsea's perspective, even though he's worked under Thomas Tuchel, falls under that category as well. So Chelsea didn't really have that option to sell him at a high market value to any other club, due to the lack of interest, due to the player's desire to only go to Inter, and because it was very public and bordering at times on acrimonious, and that puts off other suitors. And then the final option in doing a deal was Chelsea's preference, which was a player trade, and they had no chance of getting Martinez. The problem is that Inter don't want to sell him. And also the first point of reference, if Martinez was even open to a Chelsea move, which he isn't, would have been Lukaku, at which point he probably would have been put off the football club in a purely hypothetical situation. So then the defenders being spoken about was Skriniar, Bastoni and Dumfries. And Chelsea did explore each of those three. Skriniar was the one that they really wanted. Bastoni, it was made very clear early on, wasn't likely to leave the football club. But Inter, despite their financial situation and wanting Lukaku, made it quite clear early on that player swaps was not something, with the names being mentioned, that they were prepared to entertain, even if they got a permanent deal out of it for Lukaku. And the reason for that is just because once you start dealing in swaps, it becomes really problematic and lengthy. I think everyone thinks of a swap in terms of that sounds neat on paper, or I've done that on Championship Manager before. But the reality is that you've then got to get buy-in from two players, and the player coming the other way doesn't always like being leveraged as part of a swap. They can feel quite devalued by all of that and unsettled. And with Skriniar in particular, who I think of the three was Chelsea's number one preference. And who knows, they might come back in for that deal if they don't get other targets in a straight transfer. But with Skriniar, the challenge is just that the Inter feeling is that if he goes, there's high demand. And in high demand, they get well above market value. So if they leverage him as part of a swap deal, one, might not be his number one destination, and two, they may not get market value. Whereas if they have a bidding war between a Chelsea and a PSG, which is the most likely destination, they get more money and they get straight cash, and they are still of the belief, as is proven correct, that in the negotiations they can get Lukaku and sell Skriniar for his full financial value. So it's not in their interest to trade directly with Chelsea, because in their more preferable scenario, they get straight cash and a high amount of cash for Skriniar, and they still get Lukaku in a loan deal. So again, it becomes win-win for Inter. So actually, the Italian club have done a good bit of business here all around. And from Chelsea's point of view, they've got rid of a problem player, they've made a little bit of money, and they reassess again in a year's time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so we talked about Lukaku and how obviously Chelsea have loaned him to Inter. Now there's a gap that needs to be filled. And I think that we've seen Kai Havertz playing through the middle a lot. And I personally do expect him to continue to play in that spot. But within Chelsea's attack, there are a lot of names that are being floated around as potentially leaving the club, or that the club are open to letting them leave. I've seen Timo Werner, Hakim Ziyech, Christian Pulisic, to name a few. So I want to first talk about the potential incomings, and then we can talk about the outgoings. But the two main names that I've seen are Raheem Sterling and Dembele. So what are your thoughts on these players? Whose targets are these? And what's the likelihood of these deals actually happening?
So with the Sterling case, I think Chelsea are not only front runners, but that is a number one priority attacking target. And Chelsea remain very confident of getting that over the line. It has been a reasonably fast process that has escalated pretty much since day one of the Todd Boehly group coming in. But the Sterling decision has rested upon his preference rather than a challenge necessarily of negotiating with Manchester City. So Sterling, over the last kind of 10 days or so, hasn't really fully decided what he wants to do. Whereas Manchester City, because of the arrival of Erling Haaland, are quite prepared to let him go. And Manchester City sources have always said that they would be looking to get a guaranteed cumulative fee of somewhere around 90 million for Sterling and Gabriel Jesus. And Gabriel Jesus, who has just joined Arsenal, that will be announced over the coming days, but it's a done deal, was originally priced at around 55 million. Arsenal were able to get that fee down to 45 million. Raheem Sterling at the highest end is valued by Manchester City at 60 million, but he's only got a year left on his contract. So I think that Chelsea have always intimated they've been confident of getting that fee down a little bit, somewhere close to the fee paid for Gabriel Jesus. And I think that Manchester City would be open to a fee of somewhere around 45 or 50 million. And there'll be some finesse in the negotiations. So if Chelsea get Sterling for 45 million, they may then have to pay add-ons based upon individual or team performance that still push the fee back around 50 million, or even potentially a little bit more. But in essence, I think that the clubs will come to an agreement over Raheem Sterling, and Chelsea are very much leading the race to sign Raheem Sterling. And he again is there, to reiterate, number one attacking priority. And he would be a tremendous signing. Let's not forget, Sterling's only 27. And in the last 5 seasons, he has got into double figures in the Premier League of goals. So 13 last season, 10 the season before. And then in the 3 seasons preceding that, he had his best 3 seasons at Manchester City Football Club from an attacking perspective in the Premier League. He scored 20 goals, 17 goals and 18 goals. When you then look at Lukaku with 8 Premier League goals, even if Sterling repeats last season, where he scored about 1 in 3 times, let's say, in the Premier League, those extra goals should help close the gap between Chelsea and Manchester City and Liverpool. So there's still a little bit of negotiation to go, and Raheem Sterling is going to take his time, but sources intimate that he's open to the Chelsea move and coming to London. Historically, Arsenal and Tottenham have looked at him. I don't think he'll now go to Tottenham. Antonio Conte has very much, and we're going way back now, pitched to Sterling's people his role in the team. But from the outside in, and I think this was the problem as well with Gabriel Jesus, you look at Kane being there, you look at Son, and you start to wonder how often or how focal a Sterling would be in that team and what the dynamic would be between those players. Whereas at Chelsea, I think Sterling would be a more natural fit into the system, and that will probably be part of his decision-making process. Otherwise, he may as well just stay at Manchester City and still play 25 to 30 games in the Premier League, but not necessarily with Haaland's arrival be a main figure. And I don't think he'll be ostracized if he stays at Manchester City to the point where he won't play. He just won't quite have the same role or the same frequency of starting. And at 27 years of age and in a World Cup year, I think he wants to be a guaranteed first name on the team sheet. And he's far more likely to get that at Chelsea than, in my opinion, at Tottenham or Manchester City. And that's why I think Sterling will leave. And Chelsea are ramping this up. They're advancing this very quickly. And I do expect Raheem Sterling to sign for Chelsea if everything goes according to plan. Of course, there's always a danger when one club ramps things up this early in the window that other teams come in. But to date, there's no substance in any of the foreign clubs looking at Raheem Sterling, particularly not Real Madrid or Bayern Munich. So then it just depends on Chelsea agreeing a fee with Manchester City. And Chelsea will lowball this, by the way, and they'll cite more a Sadio Mane and say, if he's 35 odd million, then why is Raheem Sterling 45 odd million? But Manchester City do want some value from this, and they're well aware that Sterling is a top priority. So there's going to have to be some compromise on the fee. And my opinion is 45 million for Sterling is just good value all around. Then with Dembele, it's very complicated because there's a lot of sort of competing narratives. You hear from Barcelona that they're not going to up their contract extension offer to Dembele, and effectively that's a wage cut for him. You hear from the Dembele camp that he has U-turned and is quite happy now to stay at Barcelona because he likes playing under Xavi. He fits into the system, and he finished last season really strong. And overall, he got 13 assists in 21 La Liga games. You hear from the Thomas Tuchel camp, if you like, people close to the football side, specifically at Chelsea, that he has said specifically to Todd Boehly, he wants Ousmane Dembele. And that is my understanding as well, that he is a top priority. But then you hear from the ownership side of the football club that they're not going to farcically break the bank to meet crazy wage demands. And Chelsea's offer will also, from a wage perspective, probably be a little bit underwhelming towards Dembele. And that's the kind of situation at the moment. Dembele, at the time of recording, has two real options. One is just to sign what's put in front of him, because I don't think that Barcelona will up it. Or two is to continue negotiating with Chelsea and probably get more money than he would at Barcelona, but still get nowhere near the actual amount that he wants, which is well over 350,000. And if you talk to some sources, it's a lot closer to 450,000. And Chelsea's highest earners are only on about 300,000 a week. So there's going to have to be some compromise all around. It's a big week with the Dembele negotiation, though, because his contract is ticking down, and it's cat and mouse. It's gamesmanship. It's a chess game, whatever bad cliche you want to use, because Chelsea could make an offer now and it could prompt Barcelona to increase their offer. Barcelona could take their offer away. And from a PR perspective, if they think they're going to lose Dembele, there's certain board members, as I understand it, at Barcelona that would like to explore that option. Then Dembele effectively has no formal offers on the table, and Chelsea would have all of the cards because they can offer him something a lot lower and more in keeping with their current wage structure, and Dembele may have to accept it. But the long and short of it is that we'll learn more this week. And at the moment, there's only really two realistic possibilities: sign what's put in front of him at Barcelona, or accept an offer from Chelsea that is still lower than Dembele wants and become reunited with Thomas Tuchel, but still not get the financial terms that he's really looking for. And I think if Dembele doesn't get the wages that he thinks he is owed, he would actually rather still stay at Barcelona because he is settled. He fits perfectly into that system. So it's really intriguing. There's been no offer from Bayern Munich. They're not in the race. There's been nothing from PSG at the moment either. So it's just really interesting and intriguing, but also I'm sure from a Chelsea fan perspective and a Barcelona fan perspective, quite frustrating as well. There's talk of Liverpool coming late into the race as well. It remains to be seen whether there's any substance there. But if Dembele ends his contract at Barcelona and doesn't sign anything new and doesn't have any formal options, that is when you're going to get loads of other clubs suddenly circling. So Chelsea specifically are in a really intriguing situation here, because on the one hand, they want to be decisive and move quick. But on the other hand, they don't want to be used as a pawn to put down a counter offer and then find that Barcelona leverage that, or the Dembele camp leverage that, go back to Barcelona, and then Barcelona are forced to do something if they want to keep the player. So it's actually a really intriguing, from a neutral's perspective, situation, because there's all kinds of complicated permutations. But right now, the situation still isn't any clearer, other than to again reiterate that Thomas Tuchel does want Dembele. So there is a serious possibility that Chelsea's two attacking options will end up being both Sterling and Dembele. But Chelsea definitely want Sterling. And if the finances are right, they will formally go in for Dembele as well.
Interesting. But I'm very glad that I'm not handling any of those negotiations, because I would not want that pressure. But it's super interesting to hear everything that goes on behind the scenes that we're not really so aware about. So thank you so much for that. Apart from the attack, are there any other positions that Chelsea are looking to reinforce in this summer? Because obviously Jorginho, Conte are entering the last year of their contracts. They've lost Rudiger, Christensen in defense, Azpilicueta. Perhaps you know more than I do about where that stands, but he's entering his last year of his contract. Thiago Silva's contract got extended by 1 year. So I feel like there's really, we're talking about the attack, but there are actually some pretty big gaps to be filled in the midfield and the defense.
There are, for sure. I mean, the defense is the priority. So fans will naturally get excited by some of the attack-minded targets. And with Lukaku out, it's perfectly normal that Chelsea would look to replace him, even though it is, of course, only a loan deal. I think in a de facto sense, Lukaku's gone. He's out of the thinking. He's out of the equation. But it's the defense where Chelsea really need to strengthen, because of the number of outgoings. Tony Rudiger, Azpilicueta looks like leaving, and Barcelona want Alonso as well. Azpilicueta's the most likely of all of the outgoings to be persuaded to stay on, although he has made it clear that his preference is to leave. So
is that because of the World Cup, or because he just feels like he's achieved everything and it's a good time to end?
I think it's just purely because there's a offer he thinks he can get from Barcelona, and there's a desire to return back to Spain if at all possible. But make no mistake, Azpilicueta is also very much intent on leaving Chelsea in the right way, and has a lot of respect naturally for the football club, but also for the new ownership group. So he would like to be in a position where his announcement comes with everybody's blessing. And from Chelsea's point of view, they really only want to sanction that when they know that replacements have come in. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting with Azpilicueta, because if he goes to Barcelona and hypothetically Alonso goes and Kounde goes, then in a World Cup year, his game time could still potentially be limited as well. So at 32 years of age, he does want the game time, but I think he also just wants to get to a football club, most likely Barcelona in Spain, and make that return. It's the right move for him in a football sense, but also a family sense too. Mm-hmm. And from Chelsea's perspective, they need defenders. It's as simple as that. So they are highly likely to bring in 2 and possibly 3. And if they bring in 3, it would be right back, centre back, centre back. If they bring in 2, it will be a centre back and then potentially a right back, centre back hybrid, or the kind of player that can be versatile enough to fill in gaps, because the defence is looking very thin. But Thiago Silva needs a partner first and foremost, and the Jules Kounde deal has slowed a little bit. Chelsea sources still say that it's not off the table, but Barcelona have increased their interest. And I think that Kounde's camp are just getting a little bit frustrated, because the player thought that he was moving to Chelsea a year ago. He's agreed a deal with Chelsea. Once again, it would be a 5-year contract, but a fee needs to be agreed with Sevilla. And the situation with that fee remains that as other clubs circle and are interested, and as it becomes intimated to the seller that Kounde isn't only intent on Chelsea, even though he would move and likes the project, he's still listening to other offers, which is natural, because the longer deals go on, and the fact that he can use the previous summer as an example of the deal falling through mean that for a player that wants to leave and wants to try and be in place by day one, or as close to it as he can get of pre-season training, of course he's going to listen to other offers, simply because he doesn't want to be left in limbo and have to return to pre-season at Sevilla and then worry about what's happening and have that whole pre-season overshadowed. And sometimes we forget about the human aspect of that and how difficult it is. If a player thinks they're going somewhere and then it doesn't happen, or it slows down, it can be very unsettling. Imagine if you're in a job and you get a great job offer and you think it's done and you're really excited, and then suddenly the contract just doesn't come through and you have to go into work every single day at your old job worrying about, is the new job coming? And you always wanted to leave that old job, so you're probably going to start applying for other jobs to make sure that you've got something, as opposed to just being constantly unsettled or having to wait. And it's exactly the same effectively for a footballer. So Jules Kounde still could happen because terms have been agreed with the player, but Chelsea need to work out a way of agreeing a financial package, and they may have to pay the release clause. And I've said that all along. And for them, Chelsea would see that as above market value, but they desperately need a centre-back. And then beyond Kounde, De Ligt is another player that Chelsea are ramping up their interest in. They have always had him on the radar. Koulibaly doesn't appear to be as much of an option. Chelsea, again, had added Koulibaly to their shortlist, but Napoli are not that intent on selling. And even though De Ligt on paper has got a much higher value because he's 22, Koulibaly is 30, Chelsea are exploring, as we're finding with Boehly in the baseball sense, another swap deal. Now, I'm getting mixed reports as to what is and isn't possible as regards De Ligt. So from a Chelsea perspective, they still believe that there's 3 players actually that Juventus are interested in, and they can use any one of those 3 to potentially offset the value that Juventus see for De Ligt, which is around about 100 million euros. So a huge amount of money, and Chelsea don't want to pay that. And there's still a differential valuation between what Chelsea think De Ligt is worth and what Juventus want for De Ligt. But Chelsea are confident that a swap deal may be possible to offset that value using either, and there are 3 players here, Werner, who most believe is the most likely, Pulisic, who is very open to a Serie A move, and the third player is Jorginho. And one of them could go and knock off some of the finances, but Juventus's side are still saying they want money and they want a straight deal. So it remains to be seen whether a swap deal is possible, and even if a swap deal is possible, whether the clubs can reach some kind of compromise on the valuation. It's still early stages in those negotiations, but make no mistake about it, Chelsea want De Ligt, they still want Kounde as well. And then if they got those 2, I think they would let Azpilicueta leave and maybe come in the market for a more traditional right back in Klaus, because that kind of transfer, Jonathan Klaus, is only going to cost them about 10 to 12 million. And then that would be 3 defenders through the door in an ideal world. If they don't get Kounde, they could start looking at Ake. Fofana's not going to be an option, and Leicester are not even going to listen to offers below 70 million. And in all likelihood, they would push for 10 or even 15 million more. And this is the problem when you get a young talent who is contracted. And it's obviously the same for Declan Rice in a midfield sense. The selling club don't have to think about market value. They don't have to listen to your offers. They can just keep saying, well, not for sale, or give us 150 million for Rice, give us 85 million for Fofana. We're not even going to listen to offers below 70 million. And it's very frustrating because that effectively is saying not for sale, because they know that a club like Chelsea are not going to come in with those crazy offers. And then if they're not open to negotiation, they've got all the cards on the table. And unless the player publicly hands in a transfer request, and Fofana won't do that, and I'd be surprised if Rice does that as well, it's dead-end negotiations. But what you have to do is keep talking, because you're working windows ahead. And Chelsea need that relationship. So they don't want acrimony, they don't want to force the issue, and they don't want to overpay. So the only option left to you is to then have a cordial relationship with the players' camp and the selling club to make sure you're in pole position when they are more realistically available. But Chelsea need those defenders. The midfield is interesting because Kante and Jorginho are still there. They've still got a role to play. Kante's hugely popular and liked, but do Chelsea want to get him off the wage bill? Jorginho still has a value to play, especially because of that added string to the bow of being able to contribute from set pieces. And right now, I think the midfield of the areas where Chelsea need to strengthen will be the least prioritised, simply because maybe they have to let one or both of those contracts run down. So priority number 1 is Raheem Sterling attacking target. Area number 1 priority is defensive strength. And by that stage, Chelsea will be confident of bringing 1, if not 2, in both of those areas. 1 or 2 attackers, 1 or 2 defenders, then that's 4 through the door. After that, you then turn your attention to the midfield.
Interesting. Wow, so much amazing information. Thank you so much, Ben. One of the questions that I had, you mentioned Marcos Alonso potentially going to Barcelona. Are we looking for backup? Because we know that Ben Chilwell had a massive injury. He got brought on for a few minutes in the last game of the season, but are we looking for backup? Or across the academy, are there any players that Chelsea are wanting to take like a real hard, good look at in any position really, and are maybe going to be relying on those players instead of going out and buying new players, given the amount of exits that Chelsea have had?
I mean, first of all, it's going to be testament, I think, to the new ownership group that over the next, let's say, year, which is an early optimistic estimation, through to 10 years, these players that are loaned out should, based on the recruitment model, be more integral to the first team. And that will be one of the changes, that when we're having these conversations in the next 2, 3, 4 seasons and beyond, there should be more natural pathways between young Chelsea players brought through the academy and those that have been signed and loaned out, hopefully end up being integral to the first team, as opposed to finding that they just get moved on despite having high reputations, or they get sold at good value, but they were never really in the conversation for the first team. And obviously, in a worst case scenario, less in the new ownership group's hope and strategy, players like Tammy Abrahams that just go off and do well and seem like missed opportunities. So it will be interesting to see if we are talking more about young players attached to Chelsea coming back into the first team fold. And on paper, there's obviously a number of possibilities: Conor Gallagher, Levi Colwell, and Armando Broja, to name but 3. And if we talk about those 3, each of them will divide opinion as to how integral they could be to the Chelsea first team versus whether it's actually worth just moving them on and getting relatively high fees, which is still good business. But then if they run off and do well at their new club and Chelsea are struggling for, let's say, goals in the case of Broja, in the fan base, there'll be question marks as to whether they've repeated the same error with a Tammy Abraham style player and missed out on a source of goals. So with Broja, the interest from West Ham is clear. Newcastle are creeping into the equation as well. But I've said many times, Thomas Tuchel wants him back for pre-season to assess before any final decisions are made. And the player perspective will be key here as well, because Thomas Tuchel may say he wants to keep the player, but Broja may say, well, I did well at Southampton and now I want to play first team football. And if he says that, it's going to be quite difficult for Chelsea just to loan him out again. So then they may have to negotiate a sale with a buyback option, or they may have to accept, if they get a good fee, that he will go. But that's a two-way conversation. Thomas Tuchel wants to judge Broja, and he also has to speak to Broja and determine whether the player is prepared to be loaned out again or be a bit part player, or whether he thinks he did enough during his loan spell at Southampton to be at a Premier League football club playing regularly. But West Ham and Newcastle are the two in talks. And I'm told at this stage that if West Ham do progress an offer in the region of 25 to 30 million, that it won't be leveraged against Declan Rice. So it's very easy to neatly say, well, West Ham are saying they want 120 to 150 million for Rice, which is sky high and well above market value. But maybe in reality, if the right terms are met, they'd sell Rice for closer to 100 million. So what if Chelsea gave them Broja at 30 million and paid 70 million in cash? Could that deal get over the line? And the answer is no. West Ham are not going to engage in that deal. And even if it is inevitable that Rice will go somewhere in the coming windows, and even if Chelsea is a very possible destination, I still don't think Rice is going to be going anywhere in this window. And the other point that I would say on that is that, remember, Chelsea may spend 150 to 200 million, but they can't spend a great deal more than that due to financial fair play. And 100 to 150 million is the sort of previous regime ballpark allocation of spending that could be upped if the right players become available, somewhere closer to 200 million. But if you need 5 and you look at what everyone's available for in the market as well, there's not many ways of doing the maths where you start by taking Declan Rice at, let's say, 100 million. If you then need 4 other players, how are you going to keep that within 200 million at maybe a max and get your targets when De Ligt might be 70 odd million and without a trade could be even more? Kounde could be 55 to, if the release clause is met, 60, 61 million. Raheem Sterling could be 45 million. So even with those 3, you've still spent your 150 million and you need another defender. You might need a right back and you want to try and bring in another attacker. And of course, Ousmane Dembele is free, but there's still the wage bill to cover. So there's not many ways of getting, let's say, Declan Rice and De Ligt and bringing in any other players. And that is why I don't think that Chelsea will be too serious about getting Declan Rice. But what you have to do is you have to play the game. So if Chelsea want Declan Rice in January or the summer, they have to be absolutely convinced that Declan Rice is going nowhere now. So you still make your inquiries around Declan Rice and see what's available, because if you just start with the default, you'll revisit it, especially as a new ownership group that haven't contacted West Ham directly. Then if for any reason there's a spanner in the works and there's a surprise bid in excess of 100, 120 million, at that point, Chelsea might have to act. They may choose to act. They may find more money. It's all ifs and buts. But the point is, you don't just want to sit on your laurels and then find actually Rice is available in this transfer window and you were late to the game. But at the moment, West Ham sources, Chelsea sources, anyone else interested in Declan Rice are all saying the same thing, that West Ham's desire not to sell in this window is genuine. So you maintain the relationship, you maintain the negotiations, you keep at the player, and then you see what happens in January or the summer. With the other players, coming back to your question, that are part of the Chelsea system, I think that Conor Gallagher is naturally a very interesting one and did well, particularly in the first half of the season at Crystal Palace. And I don't think that he or Chelsea have yet decided on his future. And then Levi Colwill would be a shame if it's anything other than a loan move. But there are clubs interested in a permanent deal, including Brighton and Hove Albion, for example. So what is going to be, I think, key is that, first of all, the players returned pre-season. Second of all, the new ownership group and Thomas Tuchel establish whether these young players are prepared to buy into the Chelsea philosophy and strategy, which will be different to under Roman Abramovich. So maybe they will be loaned out for another season because they see their pathways now, because they're told that Chelsea are not going to oversign, that they are going to show more loyalty towards these players. Or maybe the opposite said to them and they're just told they're surplus to requirements and Chelsea want to find in a fee. But all of those ifs and buts with the three players I've mentioned haven't yet been established. So it is actually too early to say what's going to happen with them. But my personal opinion is it would be a huge shame if Colwell was just sold, that Broja has potential for sure. And I don't think he's walking straight into the starting 11. So there's a two-way conversation to be had there. And Gallagher, for me, is just a superb player. And if he can re-find the form, particularly in the first half of the season at Crystal Palace, he's an asset to any football club, including Chelsea. And with him, a lot's just going to depend on his ambition, because let's not forget, he's got a few caps for England. So if he started the season at a football club in the Premier League, like he did last season at Crystal Palace, he's in the conversation for England and Qatar 2022. And it's maybe a bit of a long shot, but that's through his mind as well, that if he just stays at Chelsea and doesn't play that regularly, there is zero chance he's going to Qatar. If he goes on loan or is sold to another Premier League club and does really well, then he suddenly is right in the mix for Qatar. And I'm talking purely hypothetical, but I could see a scenario, and this is why I think it's too early to say where he might go, where Tielemans, for example, leaves Leicester. Leicester need a box-to-box attacking midfielder who's got energy and can score goals. Conor Gallagher, perfect fit. He goes to a club like Leicester. He plays regularly. He does really well. Who knows what happens as far as Qatar 2022 is concerned. Still an outside chance only of him being in the squad, but let's not forget that it's 26 now going to Qatar, and he might be one of those extra names that's in the equation, but only if he's playing regular first-team football. So watch this space with all three, but despite what you may read in the press, with all three, it's too early at this point to determine whether any of them are going, staying, loaned, or being sold, because those conversations simply haven't happened yet internally in the football club.
From a Chelsea perspective, I hope that he stays, because I think Chelsea's midfield has been pretty injury prone. We've seen that N'Golo Kante can't play every single game. Jorginho can't play every game. Kovacic gets injured as well. And I understand that he would play a very different position. And maybe that's why Chelsea are looking to get like a DM type player in so that they could play the DM with maybe 2 8s. But I think it's interesting to note that a lot of transfer decisions this window could be and are affected by the upcoming World Cup in the winter. One last question for you, Ben. In order for Chelsea to have, like, in your opinion, a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 transfer window, what needs to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first of all, they need to bring in a minimum, I would say, of 4 signings. So 2 defenders and 2 attackers would certainly make it a 9 out of 10 window. I think that if we take a step back, Sterling is who they're building the attacking strategy around, and Sterling plus one other is the plan. So if Sterling comes in and a centre-back comes in, then name-wise, I think they will have got 2 10 out of 10 signings, because if it's Kounde, great signing. If it's De Ligt, great signing. Even if it's Ake, it's a decent signing. So if they got Sterling and one of those centre-backs, and Koulibaly could potentially be somebody that they try and persuade Napoli to sell, but it's more of a long shot. Those are 2 10 out of 10 signings, but it's still only a 6 out of 10 window because they need a lot more. If they bring in 2 centre-backs and 2 attacking targets, then the window jumps to a 9 out of 10. Whether that's, let's say, Sterling and Rafinha, or Sterling and Dembele, or Sterling and one other, then those 2 attackers, 2 defenders becomes a 9 out of 10 window. If they add a right back and a central midfielder to the point where 6 come in, then it becomes a 10 out of 10 window. And then obviously another area that we've not spoken about is the goalkeeper situation. So if Kepa wants first team football, they need to try and find a replacement. Strakosha is one possibility. but nothing at this stage is clear on the Kepa front. And Chelsea are in a good position in the sense until Kepa goes, they've got two great goalkeepers. But I do feel a bit sorry for Kepa because he's a top quality goalkeeper, and yet Mendy is the number one. And then from a young keeper point of view, Slelina is another perspective. And some people might have seen on social media the stunning save that he made the other day. He would be one for the future and another good signing. But, you know, once you get to that point, even with the high volume of outgoings, we're starting to talk about 7 signings. And I think that's 1 or 2 too many in terms of what may be feasible financially. So watch this space. And, you know, if we're rating Chelsea's window, it's too early to be putting scores on it. But I think that Boehly is very proactive. He's very hands-on. He's very intent on getting his business done. And I think the floodgates will open as far as incomings are concerned. So I've always said this, that fans are looking at what Arsenal are doing. They're looking at what Spurs are doing. They're looking at what Liverpool are doing. And they're looking at what Man City are doing, who have moved very early in the window. But none of these players, other than Gabriel Jesus, have been Chelsea targets. So it doesn't really matter whether your club moves fast or slow in a transfer window. It just matters if they get the targets that they want. And I appreciate that fans will be listening and saying, well, Jesus was a target, Kounde is a target, Rafinha is a target, we're worried. But you've got 2 options of consuming the window. You either look at the day-to-day and you follow all the twists and the turns and you pull your hair out and you get frustrated and you hear that your club was on the brink of signing a player one day and then wasn't the next day. And this is just the reality of the fact that, unlike takeovers where eventually there was one suitor and it was a business transaction, players are talking to multiple clubs. Agents are offering players to multiple clubs. Selling clubs have got gamesmanship. Buying clubs have got gamesmanship. You get one target and then you switch to another area first and you abandon another one. And that's the case. I don't want to say the word abandoned, by the way, but with Tielemans and Arsenal, that they've brought in Gabriel Jesus. They're trying to get Rafinha. They still could well sign Tielemans, but not as urgent as it was maybe a month ago. And that's the frustrating way of following the transfer window, doing the day on day on day. But fans obviously love that because it's their team. Or you judge this ownership group, if we're talking specifically about Chelsea, on the day they join, based on their ambitions and their restructuring of the football club. Then you take a breather and you look again on day 1 of pre-season. Then you take a breather and you look again after a few pre-season games. Then you look again on the first game of the season. Then you look again when the window closes. And then you've had measured gaps through which you can look at the progress and see who comes in. And everyone will obviously be a lot calmer once 1 or 2 come in. And then at the end of the window, you give it a proper score, by which stage Chelsea, inevitably, whoever it is, will have brought in a minimum of 4 names. And maybe that number will be as high as 6. And at that point, you will either laugh about how panicked you were, frustrated you were, demoralized you were, and you will end up seeing old tweets on social media that you've written and wanting to delete them, because delete will be there, Kounde will be there, Sterling will be there, Dembele will be there, Rafinha will be there, who knows? Or you'll be like, well, actually, a name out of nowhere came in and I quite like that name, or that was incorrect. And you might even be right, and it might be a terrible window. But the point is that it's just far too early to say, because the window is so long. But what we can say definitively is that Chelsea will make at least 2 defensive signings. They'll probably make 2 attacking signings. And then if they make those 4, they'll start to look at the midfield. They may well, probably will, bring in a goalkeeper. So I think in a hypothetical, if they got Sterling, they got Dembele, they got De Ligt, and they got one other defender, like a Kounde, it will already be an excellent window. It may take some time, but trying to put a score on it now or trying to make a prediction now is just sort of getting sucked into the day-to-day of the transfer window, when it's much better to be patient and to give insight around each deal without trying to sensationalize it, without trying to headline it in a way that either is trying to be first to saying a deal will or won't happen, because that generates clicks. But with those clicks comes buzz, and with those buzz comes frustration if things do or don't happen. And in a transfer window, as a journalist anyway, you have to try and get into the head and the mindset of the player, the player's agent, the buying club, the selling club, and the rival club. And you may get 5 competing narratives, and you put them all together like a jigsaw, and you try and say what's happening. And that's the case with Dembele in particular. There's all kinds of possibilities and permutations. So for somebody to come on a podcast or go on a broadcast like me at CBS and try and nail their colors to what will happen when there's so many possibilities, it is an opinion, but there's an element of guesswork or irresponsibility to it, because I'm not Dembele, I'm not Barcelona, I'm not Todd Boehly, but I can try and speak to each of them and tell you what direction I think it's heading in. But you have to understand that until a source tells you it is done, in the case of a transfer like Dembele, I can give you the next bit of the narrative. I can give you the next bit of the perspective. I can try and give you an overall perspective. I can give you a logical conclusion. And eventually a source will tell me, hopefully, a deal has been agreed or a deal hasn't been agreed, or they'll tell me the thinking of what the player wants. But during a transfer window, it's moving as fast as a roller coaster. And therefore, as a fan, you can trust a source. And there's loads of good journalists out there that I personally could recommend, who I think will be measured and will give you the right recommendations and the right steer. But things will change very quickly. So I think from a fan point of view, like I say, waking up and wanting a transfer is one thing. Waking up and feeling like a transfer is going to happen is another thing. But fundamentally, you can get yourself a lot more sleep and pull out a lot more hair if you're just patient, take a breath and wait and see what happens.
Very, very wise, because I know a lot of Chelsea fans are getting a bit anxious about the lack of movement officially in the window. But I know that they will feel probably relieved after hearing your words. And I truly stand by it as well. I try to not think about the transfer window so much and kind of follow the storylines and kind of see how everything plays out. But Ben, we've been speaking for almost an hour, which is insane. Thank you so, so much for giving me so much time. I really appreciate it. And let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. So CBS Sports Golazo, Golazo, is the work handles. You'll find our CBS Soccer, as we call it, output on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And then personal handle is @JacobsBen. You can technically follow me on Instagram as well, via @BenDavidJacobs, although it will be a mixture of the odd football photo with a celebrity and a ton of dog photos. I don't use that as much, certainly not around the transfer window, but you're very welcome to follow me on Instagram as well. So those are my 2 major personal handles. I've not yet been persuaded to get TikTok. Actually, I might get my arm twisted if somebody can give me a bit of a crash course into how to actually use it a little bit more effectively. But there's no TikTok handle at the moment.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out, but I have to say I'm enjoying it more than I thought that I was going to after kind of playing around with it a bit. Well, Ben, thank you again so much for coming on, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this transfer special. We've got so much incredible information out of this. And yeah, catch you next time. Bye.